Good morning. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for making time to come to our presentation this morning. We're going to talk about the efforts at the Wildlife Conservation Society, my organization, WCS, to build a movement using Salesforce that we've worked on in partnership with Traction. Obviously, you've all seen the safe harbor statement. Obviously, we're not selling anything unless you want to buy membership of our organization, but that's just there. Next slide. So let me introduce myself. My name is Jonathan Palmer. I am WCS's Executive Director for Strategic Technology, and I'm joined on the stage by my colleague here.
Yeah, hi, I'm Dave Jenkins. I'm the VP of Data-Driven Marketing at Traction On Demand, and we help WCS implement the Marketing Cloud and Salesforce.
So who is WCS? We are the world's leading conservation organization. We've been running for about 125 years. We run 500 projects in 60 countries around the world, doing conservation in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and here in the United States. We also run the 4 zoos and the Aquarium in New York, which is the world's largest urban zoo. So what does that mean for our mission? We have a very diverse audience. We work with disadvantaged urban communities around our zoos in the southern Bronx. We work with the bottom 300 million people who depend on their livelihoods that they get through working in national parks. And our constituents include people who live in penthouses on top looking down over central parks. We also provide multiple services to our constituents. We have a membership program, we do field conservation, we have cultural institutions, our zoos, and we have an education program. And that creates a whole complex set of operations we have. Because conservation is not just about working with wildlife. It's about working with communities to make sure they succeed and they get value from the protected areas. It's about working with some very serious challenges like poaching and illegal trade. It's about working with natural resource extraction companies and make sure they can extract resources for the benefit of the national economy, but do that in a sustainable way. And it's about helping governments meet their objectives to preserve biodiversity. So we're 1 year in to our project with Salesforce, and we're going to go through it in a bit more detail, but we're already really excited about what we've achieved. We've got more members signing up to our organization, 20% growth in the last year. We've only been implementing Salesforce for 1 year. Through having more members, we get more funds. And the bottom line, more members, more funds, that's more action and more impact for our mission. So before we started with Salesforce, we took a step back and looked where we were with our constituent management. And we realized we needed to make a huge shift. We needed to become a customer-centric organization. We needed to actually focus on our customers and our constituents and understand what they wanted and what they needed. We also needed to grow our database of constituents from 1.5 million to 5 million. We created a project called 5 Million Strong. We wanted a movement of 5 million people supporting our organization. We also wanted to leverage that movement to make sure they were active. They were not just donating, not just committing advocacy actions, but they were part of our organization. They were integrated to our life, saving wildlife and wild places. And we wanted to do that by giving them a great experience. So that was easy, coming up with a vision. The challenge was we basically had a number of roadblocks. We had at least five systems, but 5 core systems with our constituent data. So you could easily be a constituent of WCS and have 5 touch points with our organization in one day, all separate systems with no integration, nobody knowing that the same person has bounced around from one system to the other. You know, our frontline staff, whether they were service staff, whether they were fundraising staff, they would come to me as a technologist and they would tell these heroic tales of how they were manipulating data and dealing with the challenges of data. But that wasn't heroic. That was diverting them from their frontline task of servicing our customers. Our operations were inefficient. We could personalize, but it took a huge lift. We had reporting, but we had huge knowledge gaps. And our constituents were expecting a lot more from a modern organization. So we had to step up to those challenges. So here's an overview of those initial 5 or so systems. Now what's key here is those systems had evolved not based on the needs of our constituents, not based on what was the best way on delivering service to them, value to them, not on what was best for our organization. They had actually evolved based on the departments, the internal structures within the organization. And that has nothing to do with what our constituents wanted or needed. And so we basically had to work on this project and think about, okay, how do we pivot from these departmental systems to a single, integrated, customer-centric solution?
So Jonathan's graciously let me talk about the solution, even though it was very much a partnership putting this together. It's really interesting looking at WCS. Just like a lot of not-for-profits, you get in and a lot of people think initially, oh, it's a not-for-profit, it's going to be pretty straightforward, and most not-for-profits you get into have high levels of complexity. So WCS has a membership and ticketing business, which is completely independent in what it achieves from the donation and advocacy side of things. When you look at it as an outside business, there's very much a driving attendance initiative and trying to get people to attend the facilities. And then there's the donation side and the advocacy side. WCS have really nicely tied that together as a single purpose and driving good, positive change in society out of that. But it does mean there's very different business units you're trying to bring together when you're trying to architect a system that gives people a good, consistent view of constituents. So basically what we did was WCS did some work to take their ticketing system into Gateway. And then as a solution, we have Salesforce and the not-for-profit Success Pack driving most of the action in Salesforce, with Springboard acting as the source for a lot of the donor forms and a lot of the advocacy type work that's going on. And then Classy is being implemented in a subsequent phase at the moment to deal with peer-to-peer fundraising. Then throughout that, we've basically made sure all of the constituent data is integrated into Salesforce, and it lets us leverage it across the Marketing Cloud and the Service Cloud. So the challenge really is getting all of this rich data together. So we've got a whole bunch of constituents, and basically on the Salesforce side, on the light blue color on the left-hand side, we've really focused on getting the donations, the memberships, the advocacy actions, and all the visit behavior from the facilities all into one consistent location. And that can then be leveraged in the Marketing Cloud, in the Service Cloud. So both customer service and marketing have access to that same rich view of the data. And it's also available in Einstein Analytics. So one of the great parts about Einstein Analytics is it's very easy to pull data out of the core Salesforce platform and turn that into an analytic layer. So that building up of the foundation has really helped put that sort of thing together. So I think that the biggest challenge, though, is how do we take that constituent and turn it into a 360 customer view? So if you just want to go to the next slide, Jonathan. So the challenge, as I think a lot of you people will know, is when you've got donors and they're giving a donation, they don't have a lot of self-interest in declaring themselves as the same person they were last time they donated. So Dave Jenkins shows up as David Jenkins, and there's a whole bunch of different behaviors that show up there. So this challenge of moving from disparate systems to a 360 customer view is not just a flip of a switch. It's not just buying a system and suddenly turning it on and all these problems go away. It is a business process problem, and it's a data quality problem, and they're largely the critical parts you have to solve. The great part is Jonathan and his team did a lot of work up front thinking this through. So when they had 5 CRM systems, they spent a lot of time thinking about how do I take my data from the various systems and think about consolidating them? So whenever they took data out of one of their systems like Palm Coast Data or Gateway and pushed it into Luminate, they always kept their source system keys when it was brought across so they could build a good, consistent view in the future. The other thing they did before the launch of the project was Jonathan was fairly proactive in making sure the data was clean before we started. So a clean list of donors, a clean list of members. So when we came to launch the project, a lot of that foundational work had been done, and we could move in and create a consolidated view, which now adds all the power and the sizzle of having all this data together, just simply by virtue of the fact that Jonathan and team had kept the data clean up front. And that's a really important phase of thinking about, don't just think, I'm going 360 customer view, I'm going to throw everything in there, it's all going to be magic. You will get all your data in one system as a complete mess, so that you have to think through that process. And now that data is all together, we've got the benefit of leveraging all that membership, ticketing, and donor data in one location, which has been, I think, the biggest value add for Jonathan and team is the way that that can be leveraged.
Sure, and the slide here is crawl, walk, run. It's a little bit of consultant speak. Of course, we went through things in stages and ramped up. The thing that was really cool, but also challenging, was, Traction would say, let's crawl, walk, and run. The reality was, our experiences, we were crawling, we were walking, and running at the same time. Because there were some parts of the Salesforce platform, like Social Studio, we were able to run from day one. There were other things, like Marketing Cloud. When you go from being an organization who, every time you kind of want to send out a large volume of emails to your constituents, it's a lot of heavy lifting, to an organization who wakes up one day and you can basically email out to 2.5 million customers and put them on a customer journey that's sending out repeated follow-up emails, you're running whether you like it or not. And it was really exciting, but it was challenging, I think.
So one of the interesting things we've seen in the trend in the .org space is you guys tend to be way ahead of a lot of the private companies we're working with. So in terms of Salesforce, it's very common in .org that the full stack will be implemented. So Service Cloud, Marketing Cloud, Community Cloud, and leveraging all of that across the platform in sort of one initial project. And that's great because it can really help put together a good solid architecture that can drive how to keep this data together. So the framework we tend to approach this with is we will try and house most of the contact data inside core Salesforce. So inside Salesforce Service Cloud and Sales Cloud, you have your core contact data. When you're capturing new prospects, they're landing in that side. The benefit is you can then leverage the Marketing Cloud connector to easily leverage all of this data that's captured in Salesforce over in the Marketing Cloud. Now the problem with the core platform of Salesforce is data storage is a little bit of a challenge when you get to very large volumes. So what we look at doing on the Marketing Cloud is a lot of the work that brings in some of that richer behavioral data that is very high volume. So things like the page view data that's occurring on the websites and things like that is fed directly into the Marketing Cloud and leveraged there. Just of note, it's really interesting the way what we did with WCS with their websites is if you look at the Marketing Cloud's predictive intelligence tag, which tags every time someone's viewing a product, we basically turned that on its head a little bit, which is a pretty common structure to just tag every page view that's happening on those sites and use that as a trigger for communication. So it's a great way to get all of your web page view data into the Marketing Cloud, even if you don't have a product catalog like a traditional retailer. So we found that worked very effectively. But basically, we spend our time putting together this core framework. We have a bunch of nightly automations to bring that data together. And the key thing was the data foundation comes first, the baseline of getting all the data to be easy to use and segment. And then once we launch that, we've now had a bunch of fast follow setups where we set up customer journeys in the Marketing Cloud. So things like the objective of Jonathan and the WCS team is every time someone's putting their hand up, you're triggering a journey to communicate with that person. It's not aggressive marketing, it's just straight politeness, because I'm Canadian, so you've got to be polite all the time. But basically, when someone does something, it makes sense to trigger an email. When someone signs up for a membership, you've got to acknowledge that. When someone visits a facility, you're acknowledging upselling that. So we basically put this framework together, and now we're launching a series of journeys, and that's really where a lot of the benefit comes from monetizing the marketing opportunity.
So, as we begin to round out this presentation, let me share a few of the key learnings. As we all know, getting the groundwork right is so critical. What determined this success was not the technology and not the implementation partner and not the great support we had from Salesforce.org. They were all critical, but what really determined the success of our project was the business side, putting in the sweat equity up front to have clear strategies, clear goals, have an exciting, compelling vision that we could all build off. Of course, Salesforce and Traction were critical partners for us. And not because they were good when the times were good, but also, and this is one of the reasons why we selected Traction, was there was that shared commitment to success. And that meant when things were tough, they were there and we worked things out together. And that was really important. I think the third thing in terms of preparation, or fourth thing, was make sure your organization's ready for change. Whether it's the putting in some powerful technology like Marketing Cloud, or just understanding how switching from sort of legacy systems into an integrated CRM changes your organization. When we went into the phase of scoping out the work and implementing, there were further learnings. You know, as kind of Dave said, the crawl, walk, run, get the foundation right first. Don't over-engineer. Don't go for the most complex needs. Go for the things you are really critical, the low-hanging fruit. The second learning was we had this big high-level vision. And once we got into implementation, everyone got their heads down, and we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we execute on this problem? How do we execute on this challenge? And we had to keep reminding the team, okay, what's your mid-level goals? What are you working to over the next 60 or 90 days? Because your goal isn't to solve a small problem. Your goal is to make our customers happy. Your goal is to engage our customers. Third implementation lesson. Be really focused on that guiding light of having a customer 360 view. If you don't, and we're still working through these kind of little fringe systems that pop up every now and then. If you want to have a customer 360 view, then every touch point your customer has with your organization has to come into Salesforce. And as Dave says, it's just simple politeness. When a customer reaches out and says, raises their hand, you've got to be there to reach out with your hand to relate back to them. And that's key. Fourth thing, get the right people on side. We worked really hard to make sure the whole organization was on side. We communicated how important a bigger change this was and got the whole organization supporting this change. And as I've kind of suggested earlier, expect bumps. It's not ever going to be perfect. It's always going to be a challenge. And so expect bumps, build that into your project timeline, and work through them with your internal team and your partners. Final thing, once you go live, keep iterating out on that foundation. You're never finished with a platform like Salesforce. Every day is a new opportunity. And embrace your customers. It's an exciting world where you can basically be serving your customers 24/7. So, thank you. Any questions?
Hi. Question about Classy.
Yeah.
So we use Classy as well. I'm just curious, do you have plans for that to integrate with Salesforce, and maybe just talk a little bit about the experience knowing that the people that you're gathering data on in Salesforce are probably overlapping with your fundraising people as well?
Sure. So as Dave mentioned, Classy is the phase we're working on at the moment. We started already doing our fundraising with Salesforce. We use another tool for our general donations called Jackson River. With Classy, our vision is to support both sort of marquee events. So we do an annual run that takes place in many locations around the world. Plus, we're looking to do sort of virtual peer-to-peer fundraising. We're still kind of working through that process. But again, as we mentioned earlier, I think the key for us is to work both with Classy and with Traction to get that architecture right. We know that we're going to be in a situation where we're going to have some strategies for deduping. People are going to come in, as Dave mentioned, Jane Doe is going to come in as Janie Doe through Classy and those kind of challenges. But that's just something we're ready for.
And I think just to add to that, the one critical piece with the Springboard and the Classy integration is making sure you've got a reasonable matching approach when new donors land into the system, because we absolutely do want them to match up with any existing donors or advocates or members, because that's part of the purpose of getting this good, consistent view. But you also need a backup process in the background that can do some of that more elegant matching, because the frontline matching needs to be fast and relatively straightforward. So having batch processes later on, like using tools like demand tools or things like that to deduplicate and clean that data up a little bit more, is an important add-on to give greater quality of data.
Any other questions? We can't see so easily. Okay, we'll call that a wrap. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.